This is the beam we're going to be working with. It is a hand-hewn barn beam that a customer actually found when they were out antiquing. Let's figure out how we're going to make this into a mantle. First thing we have to do is get one flat edge. I made sure to pick the edge that had the least amount of character so we could put that against the wall so that the other three sides would be showing out, making it look really nice. Got to cut this baby to length. First thing I'm going to do is take this side and actually just make sure it's totally level, totally flat. So as you can see, it's a little bit bigger than the chop saw that I have, so I had to rotate it through, and this is actually cutting off the excess to make it the full length. Okay, so now that we have this planed up and at least jointed somewhat so we have a roughly flat surface from edge to edge, now we need to find the center point on both sides so we can draw a center line so that we can mark up where the faux beam stuff is going to go, the mounting brackets and everything else. So first of all, you have to measure what the true width is on each end. So we're at 6 3/16 over here. Six and 1/16 on the other side, so not drastically different. So with that in mind, I would rather have it sit a little bit proud. So I'm going to go ahead and mark 3 1/16 as the center line, and we'll go from there. You want to make sure you're measuring from the same end. Otherwise, nothing's going to line up correctly. Next thing to do is take a chalk line or a laser line, line everything up, and start to mark your measurement off of that. So let's get to that step. Just so we have a little bit more runway to work with, I'm also going to extend each of these lines. So make sure obviously you come up to the spots where you know everything is square, and use your square to mark everything out. This way, when I lay down either the chalk line and or the laser line in my case, I know everything is going to be totally square. So now that we have our laser line marked out and laid out, what we're going to do is follow it up and actually mark our center line across the entire piece. And for some reason I have misplaced my pencil, which is why you always keep extra pencils around. But I know this is my center line. So let's lay it out from here. Now this is a 62-inch beam. So what I want to end up doing is taking off equal amounts on both sides to make sure everything is centered when I finally mount it. So there are three things that need to happen. First and foremost, I need to lay out from either side 3 inches, because this will allow me to make sure there's enough of a base around the outside that nothing is going to blow out as I'm working with this piece. The other thing that we need to do is actually lay out the exact center spot on here, just so we know everything is equal across the board. So let's continue to lay this out. The mount is actually going to be a 2x4, so nothing too crazy. The benefit of working with a 2x4 is you know the exact dimensions, so you can lay off everything outside of that. So we know it's not an actual 4 inches, it's actually 3.5. So what we're going to end up working with is 1 3/4 on either side. So you can do it either way. Being that this is a hand-hewn piece, it's a little bit odd to work with. got this lapsed a little bit. So it's actually going to be easier to work with a smaller square and come to 1 3/4. And we'll lay that, you lay your square on the line, and that way you know exactly where everything is at. We can continue that line. We'll do the same thing over here. So you come back with the larger square now, and you lay out where it's all going to land. So now we need to come back with the laser. We need to run these lines all the way down the entire length of this piece to make sure that we're not going to be too far over some of the edges where you see some of these pieces are obviously kind of rounded over just because of that was the natural log. So we want to make sure everything is landing in between, and the layout is going to come out perfect. So let's do that now. Now for a job like this, there truly is nothing better than a track saw, simply because you can make sure everything lines up and you stay exactly on your cut. The reason I'm using this one obviously is because I have it. If you don't have a track saw, you can use a standard circular saw and actually put us a fence kind of blocked onto or clamped onto the beam. This one doesn't have a ton of extra space on it, so I'm going to go ahead and use the tools that I have. Now we're going to rinse and repeat going the other direction. And here's the finished product after we've gotten the cuts done with the track saw. Everything is paralleled all the way down. Next step is boring some of this stuff out. We have two options. We can either do it with a router, or we can do it with a drill press and a Festool or a Forstner bit. I actually happen to have one of the biggest Forstner bits I've ever seen, 3 1/4 inch. It should actually be the exact width across here, which is also why I decided to go with a 2x4 size. So I'm going to take this over to the drill press and see what we can do. Let's have some fun. As we make our way over to the drill press, you're going to notice this is very short-lived with this massive bit. Unfortunately, I could never get it sharp enough to be able to cut through this massive beam, so I ended up switching to an 1.5 bit that you'll see here. This method ended up being a little bit short-lived, sadly because of balance issues on the drill press, so I ended up switching to a router here. You'll notice I'm installing a massive plexiglass plate, and with this I ended up drilling it to size and obviously getting everything ready to go. This was from an older drill press table that I had, so the interior was already cut out. I just had to match up the base to the router base. What the installation of this larger plate actually allows me to do is have a wider surface area for this thing to balance on across the entire beam. As you notice, it's a little bit uneven across the entire beam, and the extra surface area kept it completely level and made sure this was a perfect route all the way through. I ended up doing the routing in 3 different stages. The initial stage was just getting about 1 1/4 inch down. I then followed up by using a flush trim bit that had about a 2-inch depth. And from there I was able to hog everything out, make sure it was completely level all the way down as you see here. And then I just cleaned it up with some chisels. On the left, you'll see the flush trim bit I was using, and then I switched to this 2.5 inch bit. Okay, so we have the main cavity totally cleared out right now. I have a little bit of cleanup to do in the corners with some chisels, but what I have to do next, what is the next step? I'm actually going to be sectioning out a little bit deeper in 3 main parts, equally spaced, basically the ends and then a section in the middle, so that there's a little bit more depth of support for this mantle as it's hanging on the wall. Because essentially the frame that's going to fit in here is going to be screwed directly into the wall, and I want to make sure that we have enough depth so that it doesn't sag over time. So, on to the next. I initially started trying to plunge to the full 2.5 inch depth. It just proved to be too much for this bit to handle all at once. So you'll see here, I actually ended up switching over to the drill press just to hog out the majority of the material. And then I come back with that 2.5 inch bit just to make sure everything is totally cleared out. But this ended up being a lot less labor intensive. All right, folks, being that we now have everything bored out as deep as we need to go, I'm gonna use some chisels and actually clean up and square up all these corners. And those are gonna be the final recessed area that the mount is going to sit in. So let's get to it. All right, now this thing is flipped over, so you can actually see what the mantle is going to look like. Now the customer is actually wanting this to be stained, so the first thing I have to do, I'm going to hit it with a sander. I'm going to do 100 grit, and I'm not trying to take off any big chunks and smooth everything out. All I'm trying to do is take off any sharp spots. So let's see how that's going to go. As you can see, the patina is still there, but it took off any jagged edges. Now they're going to want this stained in a dark walnut stain, so it's going to be very dark, very apparent. So this is actually going to give it a little bit more depth and character, but it's going to take off any sharp ends, and because they do have some young kids. So I just want to make sure those kids aren't going to get stuck with a sliver out of this guy. Now we're on to the part of the build where I make the internal frame structure. I initially made this out of pine, but in the end I wasn't real happy with how it came out. It just didn't seem like it was going to be strong enough for the weight of this mantle. So I ended up making another version of it out of solid white oak. The process is exactly the same as you guys are seeing right here, but I didn't think you needed to watch that twice. All right, now I've gotten the pieces cut out that are going to be the support piece that goes on the wall to then have this piece mount, the beam mount on top of it. You always want to make sure to mark your center line on the top of whatever board is going to be mounted on the wall, so that when you find the center line on the wall or the center point, you can line this up perfectly with it. You also then want to draw the center line down the front of this support piece, simply because when you do that, it gives you a line that you know is going to be lined up for putting the screws in, and you want to use some big ass concrete lag screws whenever possible. So I'm going to have to countersink those, but for now let's keep laying out where these support pieces are going to go. So now the support pieces will go on like this. Just gives a little bit more support and depth. That creates half the distance into the entire beam. So you want to make sure you're supporting as much as you can without cutting into the front side. So this is how I'm going to do it. For the stain, I ended up using the quick drying version of Varathane Dark Walnut. I think it puts so much character into this, and I was honestly skeptical when the customer asked for it, but in the end I thought it turned out absolutely fantastic. I used a long-haired brush just to make sure I could get into all the cracks and crevices to make sure this was completely covered. For the finish, I ended up using a water-based clear polyurethane for interior grade. The reason I went with this is because it was more of a matte finish and it was going to work perfectly with the stain I had used. Once it was mounted, you can see it's perfectly level. The customer is actually going to tile underneath it, and this is the piece that had to go in first. Hope you enjoyed the build.